You want to get right to the heart of a story. Yeah. Understand what's really going on without wading through tons of noise.
Exactly. Cut through it all.
Okay, let's do that. Today, we're tackling, well, the very disturbing and still unfolding story of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
It's a complex one.
It really is. We've gathered a bunch of sources for you. There's a timeline of the whole scandal, some analysis from a news show, a Forbes piece looking into FBI files that weren't released. We also have details from Epstein's private calendar. They came via Mint, the FBI's own response to conspiracy theories that was in the Express Tribune.
Right.
And importantly, this big Inspector General report on Epstein's time in BOP custody, that's the Bureau of Prisons.
The federal system.
Yeah, the Federal Prison Agency.
Hmm.
And that report includes some really powerful victim impact statements for Maxwell's trial.
And looking at all these together, you start to see, well, different angles, don't you? The timeline, what happened in prison, the victim's own words, it paints a much fuller picture.
Absolutely. Our mission here is really to pull out the crucial bits, the key insights, so you can grasp the complexities of this whole thing. We'll look at the first allegations, the convictions, obviously the questions around Epstein's death.
Which are significant.
Definitely. And the lasting terrible impact on the victims.
Okay, so where do we begin? The timeline seems like the logical place.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork. The allegations of abuse, they stretch from 2002 right up to 2018. We're talking over 100 women.
It's staggering. And the implication is it wasn't just him, but a network, associates involved.
Right. Then, 2019, he's finally hit with a federal indictment for sex trafficking. But then he dies in prison later that same year.
And we can't forget that earlier deal, the non-prosecution agreement in Florida back in 2008, soliciting a minor.
That deal is still such a sore point, isn't it? It let him avoid potentially serious federal charges back then.
It really did. And many argue, that leniency kind of set the stage, maybe fueled some of the public skepticism later on about whether the system could actually hold someone like him accountable.
You wonder how things might have gone differently if those initial charges had been pursued, well, more aggressively.
It's a big what if. And then, of course, there's Ghislaine Maxwell.
Right. Convicted in 2022, gets a 20-year sentence. Her role was direct, conspiracy, sex trafficking. The jury found she was actively helping Epstein.
She wasn't just around. The verdict was clear. She facilitated these crimes.
And we keep seeing these documents being released, hundreds of pages from court cases, like the Jeffrey versus Maxwell suit.
Even if they don't always contain, bombshells, each release adds a piece to the puzzle. It helps with transparency, keeps the details coming out.
Okay, so his death, August 10th, 2019. Found hanged in his cell at the MCC in New York, the Metropolitan Correctional Center.
A federal facility.
Yes. And the chief medical examiner officially rules it a suicide. But like you said, that's not the end of the questions.
Not by a long shot. The Inspector General, the OIG, and the FBI both investigate. The FBI says, after looking at the whole file, no crime related to the death.
But the conspiracy theories just keep going, don't they?
They really took hold. I think it speaks to the public fascination, maybe a general distrust when powerful, controversial figures are involved,
Yeah.
Dying in federal custody like that was bound to raise eyebrows.
And that OIG report, it really digs into it. They actually agree with the FBI. No evidence found that contradicts the suicide ruling.
But, and this is a huge but.
Exactly. They found massive failures by the Bureau of Prisons. They talked to 15 inmates, 10 right there in the SHU, the Special Housing Unit.
That's a high security area.
Right. And none of them gave any credible info suggesting foul play. Staff, inmates who could see his cell, they all said nobody went in or out after he was locked down that night.
So the OIG did their homework, interviewed people on the ground. Their conclusions support suicide, but the way it happened, the lack of oversight.
That's where it gets deeply troubling. The OIG found significant BOP policy violations. Staff falsifying records at MCC New York.
Falsifying records? That's serious.
2 officers, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, were indicted. Conspiracy, falsifying logs about inmate counts, about doing their rounds on the night Epstein died.
They basically admitted they faked the logs.
Pretty much. They signed off on checks that never happened, meaning Epstein was left unmonitored when he shouldn't have been.
It's not just forgetting, it's actively covering up that you didn't do your job. A fundamental breach.
And they reached deferred prosecution agreements, admitted the falsification, fulfilled the terms, and the charges were dismissed. Prosecution was declined for other BOP staff who also falsified records.
So accountability was, let's say, limited.
Seems that way. The report lists specific failures. Mandatory counts missed at 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. on August 9th. Then the 30-minute rounds overnight, 12 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. on August 10th, missed.
And covered up with fake paperwork.
Fake count slips, fake round sheets, and then there's what they found in his cell afterwards. Way too many blankets, extra linens, ripped clothing.
Things an inmate could potentially use to harm themselves, which points to cell searches not being done properly.
Exactly. Only one SHU cell search was even documented on August 9th, and it wasn't Epstein's cell. No record of when his cell was last properly checked.
For such a high-profile, supposedly high-risk inmate, that's...
Yeah.
Well, it's negligent.
And get this. August 9th, after meeting his lawyers, he makes a phone call. Unrecorded, unmonitored, totally against BOP policy.
Who did he call?
He claimed it was his mother. But the report says he actually called someone he reportedly had a personal relationship with.
Wow. And the cameras?
Well, the cameras. The system covering most of the SHU, including the camera right outside Epstein's tier, L tier, it had failed.
Failed when?
Back on July 29th. And they didn't even realize it or discover it until August 8th. Repairs weren't done before he died.
So no video evidence from the most crucial camera, just a series of failures stacking up. Broken cameras, staff shortages. Apparently one person worked 24 hours straight.
Yeah, the material handler worked 3 shifts back-to-back on August 9th. And staff were falsifying records, not doing checks.
And they were using a cheat sheet for counts.
Right. A cheat sheet that even listed an inmate who wasn't even in the SHU anymore. It strongly suggests they weren't actually physically counting people.
Incredible.
And maybe the biggest thing, Epstein didn't have a cellmate that night. His previous one was transferred out.
Didn't psychology say he needed one?
Yes. The psychology department specifically directed he should have a cellmate. Multiple staff in the SHU knew he was alone, but nobody arranged for a replacement.
It paints a picture of, well, systemic breakdown at MCC New York, doesn't it? Basic safety protocols just ignored or failing.
It really does. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Epstein's private calendar. This covers 2013 to 2017.
And it showed meetings that weren't previously known.
Exactly, with some very prominent people.
Yeah.
Like William Burns, who's now the CIA director. Back in 2014, when he was Deputy Secretary of State, he had 3 meetings scheduled with Epstein. One was even at Epstein's townhouse.
What's the explanation for that?
A CIA spokeswoman said Burns met him as, like, a financial expert seeking advice about moving to the private sector. Okay. So there was no relationship.
Still, Epstein's reputation by 2014 wasn't exactly clean. It raises questions about judgment, or maybe how insulated some people were.
Then there's Catherine Remler. She was White House counsel under Obama, later a top lawyer at Goldman Sachs.
What does the calendar show for her?
Dozens of meetings with Epstein after she left the White House, including plans for trips, one to Paris, another to Epstein's private island.
Wow. Trips to the islands.
Yeah. And Leon Botstein, president of Bard College, he apparently invited Epstein to campus, sometimes with young female guests. Botstein said he was hoping for donations.
Seeking donations with young guests present. That's uncomfortable framing.
And Noam Chomsky, the academic, scheduled flight and dinner with Epstein in 2015. Chomsky said they just discussed politics and academic topics.
It's a strange mix of people, isn't it? Finance, politics, academia.
And interestingly, these names weren't in that infamous Black Book or the flight logs that got so much attention earlier.
Suggesting maybe these connections were meant to be kept quieter.
Perhaps. The calendar also lists meetings with Lynn Forrester de Rothschild and Joshua Cooper Ramo, who was co-chief executive at Henry Kissinger's consulting firm at the time.
Any comment from them?
A bank statement from Mrs. de Rothschild said she didn't know about the legal issues or misconduct allegations when they met. Said she supported the victims when she learned the truth, and the contact was about estate management advice.
Right. It's crucial to remember, though, the calendar shows scheduled meetings. We don't always know the exact purpose or if every single one actually happened.
That's a very important point. Verification isn't always possible, and the why behind most meetings isn't stated.
But the sheer number of high-profile names inevitably fuels more questions, and for some, suspicion, even with explanations provided.
Okay, now the most important part, really, the impact on the victims. Those statements from Maxwell's sentencing are just. They're devastating.
They're incredibly hard to read, but so necessary to understand the human cost.
Annie Farmer talked about losing trust in herself, how the abuse rippled through her life, her family, the shame, the self-blame, survivor's guilt. She said it's still there.
That loss of self-trust is something you hear often. It's a profound violation.
She also mentioned how seeing Maxwell later, pictured with Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew, was re-traumatizing, how certain memories still trigger physical and emotional reactions.
These aren't abstract crimes. They leave deep, lasting scars.
Virginia Giuffre spoke directly to Maxwell in her statement. She said flat out, "I wouldn't have met Epstein if not for you." She laid out the physical, mental, sexual, emotional damage, all stemming from Maxwell bringing her into that world.
It highlights Maxwell's active role, doesn't it? The enabler, the facilitator, as Maria Farmer called her.
Yes, Maria Farmer stated Maxwell was the true enabler and facilitator of her abuse, starting way back in 1996.
It underscores that this wasn't just Epstein acting alone. Maxwell's conviction reflects that critical role.
Juliette Bryant called Maxwell a monster, talked about ongoing panic attacks, night terrors because of the abuse.
The long-term trauma is immense. Panic attacks, nightmares, years later.
And Sarah Ransom's statement was incredibly detailed. The manipulation, the intimidation, the emotional abuse from both of them.
It's grooming, isn't it? Systematic control.
Absolutely. She talked about struggles with substance use, panic attacks, night terrors, zero self-esteem, how it affected her career, her ability to trust her own judgment, to even recognize dangerous situations, dissociation.
The psychological toll is just staggering.
She mentioned multiple suicide attempts, even attached hospital photos as evidence, talked about her long, hard road towards healing. And she pointed out Maxwell's continued denial, how that re-traumatized her during the trial itself.
Her courage in sharing that level of detail is extraordinary. It paints such a stark picture of the abuse and its aftermath, and highlights the added pain when perpetrators deny reality.
So in light of all the failures around Epstein's death, the OIG report did make recommendations to the BOP.
What were the key ones?
Things like have a clear process for giving an inmate a cellmate after they come off suicide watch. Make sure high-risk inmates keep having cellmates. Better guidance on approving visits for inmates on suicide watch.
Seems like basic stuff they should have been doing anyway.
I think so.
Yeah.
And, crucially, keep working on fixing the understaffing problems.
Did the BOP agree?
Yeah, the BOP concurred with the recommendations. They reported updates to their processes for suicide watch and psychological observation, saying they're focusing more on individual care, collaborative housing decisions.
And the staffing.
They mentioned a multi-pronged approach to address shortages. Of course, agreeing is one thing.
Implementation and sustained effort are everything. We'll have to see if these changes actually prevent future failures.
Exactly. So, wrapping this up, we've covered a lot. The timeline, Epstein's and Maxwell's convictions, the really troubling questions around his death, and the massive BOP failures.
The calendar revelations, the network.
And most importantly, the devastating, long-lasting impact on the victims, in their own words.
And while the official finding on the death is suicide, those systemic failures, the lack of care, the unanswered questions, they keep this whole issue very much alive.
It's been a difficult dive into some very dark material, but trying to understand all these different pieces feels, well, necessary.
I think what really emerges is this toxic mix, right? Immense wealth and power meeting serious institutional weakness and failure. That combination allowed horrific abuse to happen and continue for so long.
The questions about accountability, about finding some form of justice for the survivors, they absolutely remain.
They do.
And maybe here's something to leave you with. Thinking about that intersection of power, money, and institutional breakdown we just discussed. How does that combination allow these kinds of horrors to take root? And what does it really tell us about the ongoing work needed, not just for accountability in this case, but to ensure real justice and maybe some healing for people whose lives have been so profoundly damaged?